Hello everyone and welcome back to The Sojourning Writer. Today we're going to be discussing the book The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Before we get into the book, a couple notes about writing physical descriptions. Less is more. As a writer, we don't need to spend a lot of time talking about the physical descriptions of our characters, but rather try and give as much information as possible with what you are trying to say, and leave the rest up to the reader. Only mentions things that are important to the story, and even then, it doesn't have to be at the start of the story, but rather should be sprinkled in throughout the narrative. As always, you can find the links to the resources in the description. The author of this book is Robert Louis Stevenson. Robert Louis Stevenson, born November 13th, 1850, and died 1894 on December the 3rd, was a Scottish novelist, essayist, poet, and travel writer. He's best known for such works as Treasure Island, Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Kidnapped, and A Child's Garden of Verses. Born and educated in Edinburgh, Stevenson suffered from serious bronchial trouble for much of his life, but continued to write proficiently and travel widely in defiance of his poor health. As a young man, he mixed in London literary circles, receiving encouragement from Andrew Lang, Edmund Gosse, Leslie Stephen, and W.E. Henley, the last of whom may have provided the model for Long John Silver in Treasure Island. In 1890, he settled in Samoa, where, alarmed at the increasing European and American influence in the South Sea Islands, his writing turned from romance and adventure fiction to darker realism. He died of a stroke in his island home in 1894 at the age of 44. Apart from this book, the other most famous book is Treasure Island. There are currently 50 film adaptations to the story, not to mention theater productions and video games. A couple of my favorites are Muppet Treasure Island from '96 and Treasure Planet from 2002. But the book about Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde no less looms over the canon of English literature. With its stark, unsettling setting and tone, it is a masterclass of showing the duality of man and the results of giving in temptations of our base nature. Each chapter is more like a series of articles rather than the standard numbered chapters. The title of each chapter is the beginning of an arc. All chapters, save the last two, are told from the point of view of Gabriel Utterson, as he witnesses and investigates the character known as Mr. Hyde. The second to last chapter is a letter from Leyden. The last chapter is written as if a letter recalling the events after the fact from Dr. Henry Jekyll. The basic outline of the book. The story of the door. This is the first time we're giving a vague description of Mr. Hyde as he injures a child. We aren't shown the connection between Mr. Hyde and Dr. Jekyll at this point, only that Mr. Hyde is staying with Dr. Jekyll, and that Mr. Hyde has the checkbook of Dr. Jekyll, which he pays off the family of the girl he injured. Search for Dr. Hyde. After the events of the first chapter, Dr. Jekyll alters his will so that if something were to happen to him, Mr. Hyde would inherit Dr. Jekyll's estate. Mr. Utterson is a lawyer in charge of this will, but struggles to do so after hearing the events of the previous chapter. Mr. Utterson looks for and finally finds Mr. Hyde, and here we get a description of the character of Hyde. Dr. Jekyll was quite at ease. After talking with Hyde, Utterson talks to Jekyll about the will and the encounter with Hyde, to which Jekyll asks Utterson to drop the matter and that he can be rid of Mr. Hyde at any time. The Crewe murder case. About a year of talking to Jekyll about the events of the encounter and will, Hyde beats Sir Danvers Crewe, a member of the government, to death with the cane of Jekyll's. Hyde completely disappears without a trace. Incident of the letter. When Utterson talks to Jekyll about the murder, he is given a note from Hyde by Jekyll. But when closer look is given to the handwriting, it is similar to Jekyll's own, leading Utterson to believe that Jekyll wrote the note himself. The incident of Dr. Lyon. For some time after the murder, Dr. Jekyll begins to change for the better and begins to host parties and helping out others. One night, Utterson goes to visit Jekyll, but is refused at the door. Utterson goes to visit Mr. Lyon, another friend of Jekyll's, but finds him in a state of shock, unwilling to tell Utterson why. Lyon says that he will die soon, and a week later he does so. Utterson is given a letter which says not to open it until Jekyll dies or disappears. Incident at the window. A week after the funeral of Dr. Lyon, Utterson and Mr. Enfield sees Jekyll looking out his window. taking in some fresh air. The three talk for a bit, but a terror sees Jekyll's face, leaving Utterson and Enfield shocked. The last night. Jekyll's butler visits Utterson and tells him he's worried about Jekyll. Utterson follows the butler back to Jekyll's house and tries to see Jekyll, but the voice that tells him to go away is not the voice of Jekyll, but Hyde. The door gets smashed down to find the body of Hyde. Utterson finds a letter for him in the desk, which tells him to read the letter from Lyon. Dr. Lyon's narrative. This chapter is just the letter of the events that Lyon wrote for Utterson, discussing the taking of the drawer out of the laboratory to his own house. At midnight, a man shows up, as was mentioned in the letter that Lyon received from Jekyll. The man was Hyde. Drinking the potion, Hyde turned into Jekyll right before Lyon's eyes. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. This last chapter is complete narrative from Dr. Jekyll's point of view. Here he talks about how he grew up with a strong sense of morality but struggled with his darker urges and felt guilt in them. Jekyll did some research and found a potion that allowed the darker side to take over. And in this form, he did those evil things that he wished he could do but felt no guilt about it. Jekyll stopped when he transformed one night without the potion. After 2 months, Jekyll gave into the temptation of taking the potion, and that night Hyde beat Crewe to death. At that point, Jekyll gave up drinking the potions forever and committed himself to doing good things. But one day, he was sitting in the park and fantasized about doing evil things again and turned back into Hyde. At this point, Lyon is called to get the potion to turn Hyde back to Jekyll. And Jekyll has to keep taking the potion every 6 hours to stave off turning into Hyde, which begins to happen when talking to Utterson and Enfield. Not too long after, Jekyll realizes that the ingredients he used to keep staying Jekyll are running out, and without the potion, he will turn into Hyde forever. Expecting Hyde to kill himself to avoid hanging, Jekyll writes a letter for Utterson explaining everything. Now that we've gone over the book, let's go into the physical descriptions. There's something wrong with his appearance, something displeasing, something downright detestable. I never saw a man I so disliked, yet I scarce know why. He was deformed somewhere. He gives a strong feeling of deformity, though I can't specify the point. He's an extraordinary-looking man, and yet I really can name nothing out of the way. No, sir. I can make no hand of it. I can't describe him. It's not for want of memory, for I declare I can see him this moment. This is what's told to Utterson about how this unknown man looked like. Here we're not giving a description line by line, but rather how it makes the character giving the description feel about what he saw. The solemn butler knew and welcomed him. He was subjected to no stage of delay, but ushered direct from the door to the dining room, where Dr. Lyon sat over his wine. This was a hearty, happy, dapper, red-faced gentleman, with a shock of hair prematurely white, and a boisterous and decided manner. As a counterpoint, we have a description of Dr. Lyon, in which it's a little bit more straightforward, but it shows a lot more about the character than just how he looks, even to dizziness, through a wider labyrinth of lamp-lighted city, and at every street corner crush a child and leave her screaming. And still, the figure had no face by which he might know it, even in his dreams. It had no face, or one that baffled him and melted before his eyes. And thus it was there that sprung up and grew apace in the lawyer's mind, a singularly strong, almost inordinate curiosity to behold the features of the real Mr. Hyde. While we aren't given a description of Mr. Hyde here because Utterson has yet to meet him, we are seeing the effects of Hyde is having on Utterson just from being told about him. The lawyer stood a while when Mr. Hyde had left him, the picture of disquietude. Then he slowly began to mount the street, pausing every step or two, putting his hand to his brow like a man in mental perplexity. The problem he was thus debating as he walked was one of a class that was rarely solved. Mr. Hyde was pale and dwarfish. He gave an impression of deformity, and without any nameable malformation. He had a displeasing smile, and he bore himself to the lawyer with a sort of murderous mixture of timidity and boldness. He spoke with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. All of these were points against him, but not all of these together could explain the hitherto unknown disgusting and loathing and fear with which Mr. Utterson regarded him. Here is a description based on Utterson's own observances. With a mixture of both positive and negative description, he shows us what Mr. Hyde looks like by what is there and by what is missing, but most importantly, how it makes him feel. An ivory-faced and silvery-haired old woman opened the door. She had an evil face, smoothed by hypocrisy, but her manners were excellent. "Yes," she said. This was Mr. Hyde's, but he is not at home. He had been out that night very late, but he had gone away again in less than an hour. There was nothing strange in that. His habits are very irregular, and he was often absent, for instance. It was nearly 2 months since she had seen him till yesterday. This description is for the maid of Hyde, and just like her employer, she bears an evil countenance. In fact, we learned later this is why she was chosen for the role. Recap. There is a rule when writing a story. The story comes first. And by story, I mean plot of the story. Everything we write must be in service of the plot. If we take time out of the flow of the story, we pull our readers out of the world we are trying to create. This does not mean we should disregard physical description when it comes to our story, but rather, if it needs to be in the story at all, or if it needs to stay in the folder that we all have to store the extra content we write. Having a clear idea of your character looks like can help keep the story consistent. Say, if the character has gray hair for a specific reason, but later is mentioned that they have red hair, could be a problem. Having a place where you keep physical descriptions for your character can make it easier to have a clear continuity. That being said, as writers, be sure to keep only the physical descriptions that are in service to the plot. There are a couple of questions you can ask yourself to see if you actually need the descriptions or not. As a note, this is not an exhaustive list. Does your physical description help the plot? For an example, he ran from the zombies, but the extra weight he carried slowed him down. Does your physical description pull the reader from the story? You see these things with lists of physical description. 6 feet tall, brown hair, expensive watch. Handsome. Particularly the last one is a declarative statement. Avoid declarative statements and allow the reader to determine their attractiveness. Does your physical description need to happen now? Can you mention in a later chapter that he has gray eyes? Can your physical description be layered with other types of descriptions, i.e. personality description, scene setting description, or political description? The line of kings all had black hair, going back to the founding of the kingdom. Can your physical description be part of the dialogue? I had a huge crush on him until I saw that he was missing a finger. These are just a few of the questions you can ask yourself about physical descriptions to see if they actually are needed in your story. For those who want to make sure that the characters that they have in their mind is the same that their readers see, an option is to pay for a character design, to use physical description to create artwork of your book. A lot of Japanese light novels use inserts at the beginning of their books to show what the character looks like. An additional option is AI. And while I wouldn't suggest you create a character through AI and use that in your book without having an artist refine it, it would be a cheaper option for those on a budget. As for those opposed to the use of AI, I get it. But with how quickly it's progressing, it would behoove us as artists to learn how to use it, because soon it will outpace everyone who refuses to adapt to the new change of the technological landscape. And while I believe AI will be one of those things that will probably destroy us in the future, it's not going away, and to not use it to help us tell our own stories will only hurt us as others will. Thanks everyone. I will be doing a practical later in the week, so keep a lookout. As always, I will put the links in the description for the resources I use in the video. Thanks again. Bye.
I am a poor, wayfaring stranger. I'm traveling through this world of woe, yet there's no sickness, toil, nor danger in that bright land to which I go.